Good evening, everyone. Hope you had a great weekend. Welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. I'm Brian Kilmeade. I'll be filling in for Tucker unless I misread the schedule. From Berkeley to Portland, Antifa demonstrators got violent over the weekend again. We got the video. You're looking at some of it now. We'll have more of that in just a moment. But first, it isn't just Antifa that's losing its mind in every respect. You got liberal office holders and candidates. They're moving fast to the left. Democratic Senator Brian Schatz, for example, of Hawaii, he's publicly announced his support for New York Times writer Sarah Jeong in her racist, anti-white, anti-cop tweets. In Arizona, gubernatorial candidate David Garcia wants voters to imagine a world where anybody can enter freely from Mexico.
I want to just take a second and imagine. Let's just imagine. Just imagine no wall in southern Arizona.
Yeah, can you imagine that nightmare? In New York, gubernatorial candidate Cynthia Nixon, yes, she's legitimately running still, says it's time for the Democratic Party to overtly push socialism, and others on the left seem on board.
The establishment is terrified of that word, socialism. But if we learned one thing from the Obama years, it's that Republicans are going to call us socialists no matter what we do. So we might as well give them the real thing.
I think this is going to be, though, a big debate point on that Democratic primary stage in 2020, isn't it?
I don't even think it's going to be a debate point. You either embrace the label and own it and be a player, or you can be like Andrew Cuomo and be off in the sidelines.
You believe this? It's like the Republican Party is getting the gift that keeps on giving. Nixon's New York Democratic colleague, Attorney General candidate Zephyr Teachout, that's her actual name, wants to prosecute ICE.
ICE has to be abolished. And I say that as somebody who's running for one of the top law enforcement jobs in the country. And as Attorney General, I will continue to speak out against ICE. I will prosecute ICE for their criminal acts.
I'm embarrassed for her. And conservative lawmakers, office holders, and ordinary Trump supporters continue to face harassment from those heeding the call of Congresswoman Maxine Waters. Remember?
If you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd. And you push back on them. And you tell them they're not welcome.
Columnist Mark Stein here. Mark, there are times when you have to really split hairs to find out where the problem is. We don't have to split hairs here. Where do you start? First off, socialism. Let's just embrace it.
Right. Right. You know, 20 years ago, during the Clinton era, when you watched campaign ads, the Democrats all ran as pseudo-conservatives. That I'm Fred Smith. I'm tough on crime. I believe in and you had to wait to the end to find out whether this was a Republican or a Democrat pretending to be tough on crime and all the rest of it. And I can understand that's frustrating. And they want to let their inner leftist out. And if you look at the last election cycle, one of the problems with the Democrat Party is that moderate Democrats, centrism got associated with the Clinton kleptocracy. Hillary is just someone whose turn it was and was running a phony baloney foundation that's some kind of racket for getting like seven-figure sums from layabout Saudi princes for doing nothing. And that tainted centrism and all the romance on the Democratic Party. You saw with Cynthia Nixon. All the romance is on the far left, and they're moving farther and farther left at an extraordinary rate.
Well, you have that 28-year-old who upset Joe Crowley, and now she's the rock star without any legitimate substance.
No.
She lives in fear of the follow-up question to any topic.
But you see, that's like the old, I can't remember whether it's Lenin or Stalin, who, famous line, whom. In an age of identity politics, what matters is which side of that you are. Are you the approved designated group, as that young lady is, or in the ICE dispute, for example, the reason they don't like ICE is because ICE detains illegal immigrants. I don't particularly like the immigrant. Anyone who's been through legal immigration isn't fond of the immigration bureaucracy. But for the Democrats, it's simple. They like illegal immigrants, so therefore the people on the other side of that question, the immigration enforcers, are the bad guys.
So there's a lot of law enforcement officials in families. If you don't have one directly in your family, you have one related to you, might even be a good friend of yours. When you say abolish ICE, that hits home everywhere.
Yeah.
In what country is that a good political thing to do? And some Democrats, I think, are worried about the abolish ICE move. And I'll add something to that. 9 out of every 10 arrests through ICE are people with criminal records. What's your problem with that?
Well, the reason the leftists are keen on that is because they don't care about that. Just so you listen to that guy who's running for governor in Arizona, and he's saying, imagine a world where anybody can enter from Mexico. There's a name for that world. It's Mexico. If you let anybody enter from Mexico, you become Mexico. The border moves north, and eventually it's at the Canadian border, and you're all Mexico.
I thought the debate was between the fence, the drones, or the solid-state wall. The debate is now for open or all in?
No, because again, that's like the old school Democrats who, yes, of course I believe in border enforcement once we have the amnesty and we legalize these hardworking people who just want, and it gets frustrating to have to do that. So it's much easier to let your inner open borders side out. Their open borders, their identity politics, they've had it with the whole Clinton thing of pretending to be, they don't want sister soldier moments, any of that anymore. They don't want to triangulate. They don't want all the equivocations. I think they, at a certain level, they actually feel dirty from living with those accommodations. And the last time round, Bernie Sanders, if it had been a free nominating process, would have won, because that's where the party is.
$31 trillion for Medicare for all. You had this woman from New York who's going to get the seat that Joe Crowley had come out and say, we're going to essentially get rid of the $700 billion to give to the military in order to fan that out and pay for all her social programs.
No, that's the fascinating thing, because if you look at genuinely socialist countries, the average European social democracy in Scandinavia or whatever, they pay for their socialism. What you have here is actually a fantasy socialism where they think none of these trillion-dollar sums mean anything, so let's just give even more and more trillions to everybody.
Mark Stein will be filling in for Tucker on Wednesday. Until then, Mark, I'll see you in the halls. I'll say hello, but it will never be the same. Okay.
Let's build that fence and keep you out next time.
Thank you very much. So he's turned on me already. Meanwhile, let's change gears. Teslin Figueroa is a former Bernie Sanders staffer and founder of Teslin Figueroa, the communications group, and she joins us right now. Teslin, first off, when it comes to some of the mania around what's happening right now, where do you think the Democratic Party is heading?
Well, I mean, clearly they're probably heading over a cliff if we continue to watch the way you have the divide between the left and the center Democrats. You know, it's just amazing. You know, I tell people all the time, look at the resume of the candidates that are actually talking. Look at those elected officials that are actually talking. For 20, 30 years, they've been in the center. And now all of a sudden, because Senator Sanders appears to be the most popular politician in the U.S., now all of a sudden everybody is a socialist. But even Senator Sanders has what we call in the church backslid and went from saying abolish ICE one moment and then not abolish ICE and then back to abolish ICE, or we should refocus, what they call re-examine ICE. So it's just really all over the place. People don't understand where people are going, what position that they take. And even if I disagree, because I'm not a socialist, even though I work for Senator Sanders, I respect people who are consistent. And what we're seeing now is inconsistencies all across the board.
No one ever said Bernie Sanders was inconsistent or inauthentic. He's very authentic. That was part of his allure, as is President Trump. That was why it would have been an interesting matchup, because they're so different in their philosophies. So let's move ahead. If you are somebody who studies history in America, you know this is supposed to be a big wave for Democrats. They seem to, with these two policies in particular, doing everything they can to get rid of that wave. Do you look personally, from what you see right now, do you look for them to pick up the 23 seats to gain the House, despite what we just went over?
Well, you know, it might be a wave in some primary states, you know, in some areas, but it also could be a flood that could drown everybody out in 2020. You know, people have to pay attention to what works in a primary, what works in one particular district, like Ms. Cortez's district, may not work necessarily around the country. Democrats and Republicans, the majority are in the center. And if Democrats keep thinking that everybody is just a socialist or everybody is all the way left, then they're misinformed. I work for Senator Sanders, yet I'm not a socialist. So if they keep trying to box everybody up in one box and try to say that this is just the direction that everybody's going and not really get to the ideas and figure out what people really want and pay attention to the polls, then we'll be in trouble.
Teslin, right now we know the economy's going great, but if you want people to keep some of that money, don't raise health care costs. And I'm not saying point the finger at any party or any person. The party that understands health care and delivers quality health care at affordable prices will be in power. If you want to get to the kitchen table in America, it's still health care.
Well, I can say for myself personally, for me and my daughter, it's over $430 being self-employed to cover insurance for myself. And I talk about all the time when I had a staffing firm with 300 employees in Orlando, we went out of business because they were forcing temporary agencies to cover health care. So it's still an issue that has not been resolved. Although we like to hear the word reform, it is yet to be actually completed and actually providing good health care for people such as myself. So you're absolutely right. Something has to be done about it. And if we can remove the partisan politics and actually have a real conversation on what does that mean for people like myself and small business, then we can be headed in the right direction.
And Teslin, lastly, just throw out two names that you think you hope will be front runners and run for president on the left if you had your druthers.
Well, what I can tell you is just because I work for Senator Sanders doesn't mean that he'll automatically get my vote. I'm looking to start all the way from scratch. Let them line up, let's get 10, 12 candidates. I tell people all the time, pick a side or step aside. And so what I'm looking to see is candidates actually be consistent on their message and not 1 minute is one thing. Like today, Kamala Harris said that she doesn't believe in identity politics when the Democrats have been running on identity politics for the last several decades. So right now I'm just confused. So I'm interested to see who all's going to come out, all of the frontliners as well as people that we may not have heard of, but not just anybody because they fit what appears to be popular, but actually some real substance behind it as well. All
right, you're going to have a crowded stage, I sense, come nomination time, and it'll be all about that after the midterms. Teslin, thanks so much.
Thank you.
And best luck with your company. Meanwhile, straight ahead, the media is melting down over yet another presidential tweet. What set them off this time? That tweet, that story next. Plus, Antifa violence in Berkeley, the dramatic video coming your way. All right, today the president tweeted, I know, for a change. He said this, fake news reporting, a complete fabrication, that I am concerned about the meeting my wonderful son Donald had in Trump Tower. This was a meeting to get information on an opponent. Totally legal and done all the time in politics. And it went nowhere. I did not know about it. The media responded, as they do to most Trump tweets, with a total spasmodic meltdown as they claimed this was a huge breakthrough to the Russian collusion story. Watch.
Now to President Trump in a dramatic new admission in the Russia investigation. Reversing course on previous denials, President now saying that the purpose of his son's Trump Tower meeting with Russians was to get information on Hillary Clinton.
Carelessly on a random Sunday morning tweet does it, an admission of lying, and something that at least starts to fit the dictionary, if not legal definition, of collusion.
Donald Trump admitted this weekend they were all lying. What are the consequences of this?
It's so weird to see so many negative stories on President Trump in the morning. The only problem, President Trump said the same exact thing a year ago.
I think from a practical standpoint, most people would have taken that meeting. It's called opposition research or even research into your opponent.
So wait a second. He said it already? Byron York writes for the Washington Examiner and told everyone about this at noon yesterday, yet everyone ran with the story. We have to tell that paper boy from the Washington Examiner to deliver the newspaper early, Byron. First off, how do you explain the hysteria?
It's actually kind of difficult to explain because there's this idea, you heard George Stephanopoulos say this was a dramatic new admission, reversing course on the president's previous positions, and it simply wasn't. I mean, you could only argue that people had perhaps forgotten that a year ago, a little more than a year ago, the president said the same thing. And by the way, you played a little soundbite of President Trump saying that in July of last year. He was even more succinct in a tweet of about the same time where he said most politicians would have gone to a meeting like the one Don Jr. attended in order to get
info on an opponent. In other words, precisely what he said this time.
Right. And by the way, it was Don Jr.'s emails that he sent out as soon as this story became public that he was being solicited, set up this meeting from his promoter friend in England. These people want to meet you to talk to you about whatever that they had. And he said, great. They set it up. It went nowhere. Almost everybody agrees. The Huffington Post says Trump finally admits his campaign colluded with Russia at Trump Tower meeting. The New York Times and Washington Post portrayed the tweet as a new and significant development in coverage on Sunday.
Well, Brian, we should admit, it would have been difficult for the president last year after those emails to come out to deny that the meeting, the proposal for the meeting was about turning over some sort of incriminating information about Hillary Clinton. It was just right there in the email.
Byron, exit question. I get the sense the president's going to win out over his legal team and sit down with Mueller. Is that what your sources are saying?
That is still very unclear. I mean, he's hearing over and over and over of the dangers of talking to Mueller. On the other hand, you have to remember, Donald Trump has been engaged in a lot of litigation over his career. This is not the first time he's sat down and been questioned. So this idea that perhaps Trump will just kind of fall apart if he faced questioning is not really an accurate one.
But he has had trouble in some of those depositions in the past, so hopefully he'll realize he's not impervious to that from his perspective. Byron York, great to see you. You had the story early.
Thank you, Brian.
And you stayed sane throughout the day. Good luck.
Thank you.
All right, straight ahead. Antifa came back in a big way this weekend with violent demonstrations from Portland to Berkeley. That ugly story next. All right, President Trump has called out fake news in the failing New York Times, but now he has a preferred label for the entire mainstream media establishment. It's enemies of the people. Now, complaints about the label could have emboldened the president. In fact, it has. He's doubling down on using it. So now the media is going back to calling Trump a dictator.
This is the type of behavior that happens in authoritarian societies, where leaders and their supporters are pushing down the media.
When he says fake news, he means news that is not favorable to me. But that is not how it is received by the people to whom he is speaking. They think that the news is being made up. Folks, it's not.
It's a very cynical strategy, trying to divide between good outlets and bad outlets. Trump does this sometimes. It's BS, and it should be called out.
And he does every time they give him a microphone. Tammy Bruce is the president of the Independent Women's Voice and joins us right now. Tammy, who's right?
The president's right. And here's the issue. Gallup did a poll about the importance of the American media. And, of course, the supermajority of Americans believe they have an important role in our democracy, right? I mean, they're supposed to be giving us the news and challenging power. And just by not doing their job, which they clearly have abandoned since President Trump was candidate Trump, they've thrown their lot in within the political arena. They've decided that they are going to help certain things along, which is an abandonment of the American people in general. And so there's also a majority of people, I think it was 66%, believe that there's no real fair, unbiased news that they can rely on. So Americans, at least there's, other outlets they can get some news from. But this has been an abandonment of an incredibly important American industry. And you see it right there. What's fascinating is if Trump was a dictator, none of those opinions would be heard on the news, right? It's turned into a selfish, inward-looking entity, almost like an infant that's not getting what it wants.
I mean, there are so many deranged people out there. I worry about them getting the wrong idea and really targeting the media. And you did see on C-SPAN a caller call in and say, "I will shoot Brian Stelter." So that is disturbing on all counts.
It is, and obviously the problem here with this entire dialogue is that the media, as opposed to doing their job and just reporting the news for people, which would take all the steam out of what President Trump would be saying, but at the same time, maybe he wouldn't be accusing them of being fake news. We do know, of course, people have been hurt, and it has been Steve Scalise, attempted murder of 23 other Republicans, the attack of Rand Paul. You've got threats and individuals being arrested for threatening the president and other Republican office holders. So we know that the rhetoric has compelled people to do crazy things. So we all need to recognize that.
Yeah, Sarah Sanders, Kristen Nielsen, all Stephen Miller. Now, another topic. Over the weekend, the president tweeted. LeBron James was just interviewed by the dumbest man on television, Don Lemon. He made LeBron look smart, which isn't easy to do. I like Mike. The president was instantly labeled a racist, even though He's actually been calling other people who happen to be white dumb for years. Bob Corker called him dumb and incompetent. Lindsey Graham dumb. He called Mitt Romney the dumbest candidate and the worst candidate we've ever had. And Mika Brzezinski dumb as, I think, a pile of rocks. So he's an equal opportunity offender.
Yes.
Are you surprised people saw race in this?
I think that's, look, LeBron announced that he needed to do more than just sports. He's concerned about his community, so he's engaged, and that means talking about politics. So he's in the kitchen now. And that is a reaction not from people of color. It transcends complexion, but it's a liberal answer to attacks. And it's a habit. And I think LeBron James is better than that. I think that he knows, and everybody knows Donald Trump, incredibly transparent. You're right. Says all of these things about all kinds of people. And the fact is that Donald Trump is actually quite fair in the nature of who he's going to attack and praise based on the nature of what they're doing as he reacts to what he sees as either negative or positive dynamics.
I wish he wouldn't have done it. I wish he wouldn't do it with a personal attack. LeBron James takes shots at him. And by the way, he's not dumb. Don Lemon is not dumb. But keep in mind, the president played golf this week with Lindsey Graham. A man that he's insulted repeatedly took his phone number and read it to the whole world.
One of the things that goes back to our first conversation that we can ease some of this is go after people on policy. Talk about the issues that affect our lives, that the personal back and forth from the media to the president and to Republicans and the other way is not necessarily the most helpful thing. We need these policies that the president's promoting to succeed because they help our lives directly.
All right, last topic for you, Tammy. We proved that we can do three, and we're about to prove it now.
Yes, we're going to do it.
One thing over the weekend, Antifa ugly again. Demonstrations in Portland and in Berkeley, they got violent.
Officers near Southwest NATO Parkway in Southwest Columbia.
Meanwhile, conservative activist Charlie Kirk and Candace Owens wanted to do this thing called have breakfast, and they were harassed this morning at a Philadelphia coffee shop. You got one man, they came flying in there, poured a drink on Kirk, while numerous other white activists shrieked, "No white supremacy." By the way, Candace Owens is black. They also had anti-cop rants at the end of it. And Candace Owens, I just saw, tweeted out thanking the cops for stepping in at the right time. This could have been really ugly.
Yeah, it could have been. And look, they even smashed the window of a Marine Corps recruiting station.
The Antifa did.
The Antifa did. But you're looking at, white supremacists or the alt-right and Antifa. There are people who are pretty much probably living in their parents' basements coming out into the light for the first time.
That was one of the clashes.
That was, and I think that, you're dealing with both Portland and Berkeley, which have not had a very good history of confronting these things. Even recently in Portland, of the police and the mayor kind of not acting when Antifa, as an example, was blocking an ICE office. So these are cities that have seemed to kind of, for some reason, prefer that these things get out of control. Obviously, the American people see this. It's not good for certainly liberals. It's not good for our dialogue, but the violence is unacceptable, and the police departments have got to have a bit more aggression when it comes to stopping.
These are the flares. That this is going to get really ugly, where we're watching those violent groups, but when Candace Owens, for example, wants to have breakfast with Charlie Kirk, two 20-somethings who are part of Turning Point, and they just want to have breakfast in Philadelphia, where our country was essentially founded, where the Liberty Bell sits, and they have to take this type of abuse.
Well, this is, remember,
because they believe something different.
The Maxine Waters argument of confront people, that was really a message and a permission slip to confront Trump supporters. It wasn't just about the administration. Few people have access to administration members, but you do have access maybe to a Candace Owens and to a Charlie Kirk and to your neighbor. That's why when you've got somebody like Maxine Waters, any other representative, leadership needs to step forward. Democrat leadership has to step forward and say, really, enough is enough. They can stop this by signaling that. Hillary can help stop it. Jesse Jackson can help stop it. Paul Ryan can. Mitch McConnell. It's across the board. They can come together and say enough is enough if they really want it to end.
Right. I tell you what, Candace Owens and Charlie Kirk will be on Fox and Friends tomorrow to talk about that incident. It's extremely extremely hard to keep you cool. You don't know how out of control that's going to get. This time he was hit with water. Who knows what's going to be next?
Right.
Tammy Bruce, thanks so much and great job on the 5.
Thank you.
All right. I know you'll be here tomorrow night.
I will,
right?
tomorrow night in that chair.
You'll be right over here. Meanwhile, straight ahead, Tucker is back after the break to interview a Democratic congressman who's already running for president. All right, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro nearly became the first national leader to be assassinated by a drone. I'm not kidding. At least that's what the Venezuelan authorities are saying after a drone apparently exploded overhead while Maduro was delivering a speech that probably no one was paying attention to. Maduro certainly has no shortage of enemies. His country's economy has completely disintegrated. He's violently cracked down on protests against his government, and he's accused of rigging an election last May. Still, critics point out the attack gives Maduro a convenient excuse for further crackdowns on the country's dissidents. Meanwhile, as we said earlier, the Democratic Party has been descending into chaos recently. The party is becoming more and more extreme on race, on immigration, on economics. At the same time, they're harassing or even physically attacking anybody who disagrees. Maybe there's another way, though. Congressman John Delaney is a Democratic congressman. He representing Maryland. He spent the last year mounting a dark horse presidential campaign and has published a book, The Right Answer, How We Can Unify Our Divided Nation. Tucker recently spoke with him. Here's what he had to say.
So I think most people are strongly in favor of the idea of reuniting the country, assuming that's possible. But it's hard to find bipartisan consensus on anything right now. How would you do it?
Well, I think there are some areas where there's bipartisan consensus, things like infrastructure, criminal justice reform, dealing with the opioid crisis. I mean, the way I look at it, Tucker, is really simple. There's things in our debate that we kind of agree with each other on, and there's things that we disagree with each other on. And there's a role for both of those things, but we never spend any time on the things we agree with each other on. And that's part of the problem. It's kind of simple, but in a way, our job is to do both.
I agree with that absolutely and completely. So give us just a reassuring list of some of the things that you think we agree completely on.
Well, I think we agree that we should invest more in our infrastructure, right? It's crumbling, it's falling apart, we're falling behind our competitors. I think we agree that we should reform our criminal justice system. I mean, we've looked at the data, and it's been very unfair for a very large number of our citizens, and I think there's broad support for reforming that. I think we agree that this opioid crisis is kind of ravaging our country right now, and there's things we need to do there. So I think there's actually a pretty long list of things. I think we all should agree that technology is changing everything in our country, and it would be nice if we had a national artificial intelligence strategy like many other countries do for how we coordinate the private sector and the government sector working together on some of these things. I think there's a lot of agreement among Democrats and Republicans that we need a new authorization military force because we're relying on a 17-year-old document to engage in all these conflicts around the world. So this is just some of the things where I think there's actually a lot of agreement among the American people.
But not in the Congress.
Not in the Congress. Now, and there's reasons for that. Gerrymandering is a big problem. It's a big problem because it creates congressional districts that don't really represent the American people, in my judgment. And that's, I think, the core of the issue is the Congress is broken in many ways, and our democracy is broken, not in terms of, do people cast votes and are they counted and does the person with the most votes win? That clearly still works in this country. But the representatives who go to Washington don't go there with the spirit of trying to find some sense of unity and common purpose that has always formed kind of the cornerstone of the American experience. They go there and they fight and they put their own political parties ahead of the country, and as a result, we don't do anything. And I think there's a huge cost associated with not doing anything, and I think we've paid a price for a long time as Americans.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question about that. I got to ask you one final personal question. So you've been in the Congress a couple of terms.
Yes.
Now you're leaving to run for president.
I am.
If you could do it over again, would you? Was it worth it? Did you like it? Did you get anything out of it? How awful was it?
Oh, I think it was terrific. I think it's the great privilege of my life to serve in the Congress of the United States. I think this is a magnificent country. Even with the issues we have today, I think we have the best hand of any country in the world. We just have to play it a little better. And it's been an amazing experience. I've learned a lot. I've met some terrific colleagues. And I think I have a very clear perspective on the type of leadership we need, not only as president, But I think there is something deeper that we need in this country, and that is for the American people to have some responsibility associated with fixing our broken democracy and bringing us together. And I would never have had that perspective had I not served in the Congress of the United States.
You're an optimist. I hope your party agrees with you. John Delaney, thank you.
Thanks, Tucker.
I'm not sure they do. Online and in print, the right is being censored. So why is egregious racism on the left being excused? That story we'll analyze next.
Clearly, she should not have reacted the way she did. However, it is a normal human reaction with both the somatic and the autonomic nervous systems to respond when under threat. So she was being attacked and responded.
That was California radio talk show host Ethan Bierman on this show last Friday, defending the New York Times hiring of Sarah Jeong, despite her racist, anti-white, anti-cop tweets. Bierman later uploaded video of that segment to Instagram, right? A lot of people do that. But it was deleted. And an Instagram spokesperson told us, quote, "This post was moved in error, and we are sorry. It has been since reinstated." Ethan Bierman joins us right now. Ethan, why do you think that happened? You were just retweeting something and actually defending the Times writer to a degree.
And not only that, Brian, good to see you tonight, by the way, Tucker and I didn't actually quote Sarah Jeong's tweets. We were having a conversation about it. The only thing I can come up with right now is on social media, we are so divided. People are so angry about things. We're unable to have conversations that somebody, whether it was on the left or the right at this point, was very angry that we were even having the conversation, and people are petty and somebody said, flagged it, and Instagram lacks the systems to actually review what is being posted before they remove it. And so they removed it. I found it really upsetting, actually. I mean, it didn't make any sense when I saw it was removed.
But, you know, you're not the first one, but you are, as someone who's not necessarily a conservative talk show host, for someone to take that down because you were talking about a topic that many conservatives found offensive, and I think Americans found offensive, and that was her prior tweets and statements. What does that tell you about where we're heading?
Well, I think it's problematic that we can't have a conversation, or that people are upset by even having the conversation. Look, there are definitely legitimate concerns when people post hateful things. Some of the messages I get about my Jewish background are absolutely reprehensible and should be taken down and should be flagged and marked and whatnot. If you're going to viciously attack somebody and or call for violence, there is no place for that. And I agree with these platforms preserving their terms of service and protecting those edges. But just to have the conversation about something, Brian, you and I engage in debate regularly. I think it's important. I think it's healthy. And I think that we all grow when we're engaged in healthy debate. Calling names, calling for violence, not necessarily a good thing, and especially calling for violence. I reserve the right of those platforms to remove those posts.
30 seconds left, Ethan. Do you think this is bots? Is this an algorithm, or do you think this is a human being doing this stuff?
By even having the conversation. Look, there are definitely legitimate concerns when people post hateful things. Some of the messages I get about my Jewish background are absolutely reprehensible and should be taken down and should be flagged and marked and whatnot. If you're going to viciously attack somebody and or call for violence, there is no place for that. And I agree with these platforms preserving their terms of service and protecting those edges. But just to have the conversation about something, Brian, you and I engage in debate regularly. I think it's important. I think it's healthy. And I think that we all grow when we're engaged in healthy debate. Calling names, calling for violence, not necessarily a good thing, and especially calling for violence. I reserve the right of those platforms to remove those posts.
30 seconds left, Ethan. Do you think this is bots? Is this an algorithm, or do you think this is a human being doing this stuff?
Well, I think overall the platforms have to have algorithms for removing posts, and I think that where we've kind of gone too far with this is they default to removing first, and then only when, like Fox News reached out, did a human bother reviewing to say, yeah, there's nothing wrong with this post, and so yeah, we're counting on algorithms first, and I think they still have a lot of work to do.
It's just amazing. So many times the topics that are conservative are getting targeted, but in this case, you talking about something got targeted. Either we'll stay on top of that. Thanks so much.
Brian, good to see you. Thanks for having me on.
All right, Sarah Jeong's overt anti-white racism isn't a concern for the New York Times. She still got her job. Meanwhile, it was Business Insider Daniela Greenbaum who had an article removed simply for defending Scarlett Johansson's casting as a transgender in a role in a movie. She's an actress. Daniela Greenbaum joins us right now. Daniela, you seen some of the double standard here?
Yeah, I think the Times probably did the right thing by defending her. Maybe they shouldn't have hired her in the first place, but if they hired her, I think good on them for standing up. The issue is we're seeing such a double standard in who gets to say what. So this woman says, I was kidding, it was a satire, I was responding to trolls in a troll-like fashion. And the Times and all of liberal Twitter responds, great, no problem. Where is that courtesy when you're a conservative?
It doesn't really happen. And in your case in particular, for people who missed the show and the follow-up, you decide to write that Scarlett Johansson can play this transgender role. Why is there outrage? She is an actress. She is not doing a documentary. So you pointed that out, and your employer's reaction was?
To take the piece down after my colleagues had written a series of letters expressing outrage at what I had said and the way I had said it.
You're hired to give your opinion?
Yes.
You gave it?
Yes.
And when they said that you would have to take that down, you said, and they also added something else. They said, oh, there'll be a committee who decides if your column could be posted in the future.
They wanted me to meet with a committee anytime I wrote on something that was culturally sensitive to make sure that I wasn't ruffling too many of the wrong feathers.
And your reaction was?
To resign.
And do you have any regrets about doing that?
It's a little scary not to know where I'm going, but I've been freelancing, and at least I have my integrity.
You do have your integrity, but what has this whole process showed you? From the story we just read to the Candace Owens got stopped over the weekend,
crazy.
Right? And for doing nothing but talking about this story, what has this whole process told you about over the last week?
Well, what I think's been fascinating is there was two camps of response to this woman's tweets, right? Some people on the left said she was kidding, let's take that at face value. And other people said it doesn't matter whether she was kidding or not. You can't, if you're anti-white, it's fine because she's Asian American, she's a woman, she's high enough on the totem pole of oppression that we're going to excuse anything she does. And my question is, where's that courtesy for Ayaan Hirsi Ali, right? She gets accused of being Islamophobic. How about the fact that she grew up in Somalia and was oppressed by Muslims? Of course she has
happens
beef
to be
with
black
religion.
and Muslim.
Exactly. So
Right.
we're seeing this crazy double standard of who gets to talk about what, when it's excused, what excuses we make, who we defend, who we criticize, who we call to fire.
Darrell Issa said over the weekend, the retiring California congressman, he goes, maybe it's time we have to come in with regulation, almost like the FCC did with broadcast. Are we getting to that point? I don't even know if that'll work, but that's what they're talking about.
I think we need to have really clear lines, and the only line I can see enforcing here is if you call for violence, okay, remove it. Anything short of that, whether it's offensive, controversial, hateful, we got to let the marketplace of ideas clean up that speech.
You're going to be fine, Danielle. You're too talented not to be. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
All right, straight ahead. First statues were taken down. Now some Texas activists want to rename the state's capital because it was named after a guy that defended slavery. That story from About Austin, Texas, when we come back. All right, get ready for this. You got a backlash against pro-slavery historical figures, and it has led to schools being renamed and statues being removed or destroyed, and we've told you that over the last 2 years. But the latest victim could be one of America's largest cities. Texas state capital Austin is named for Stephen F. Austin, the state's founding father. But Austin supported slavery, owned slaves himself. Now a report by Austin's chief equity officer suggests the city should consider renaming itself in an effort to blot out its memory. John Daniel Davidson is a senior contributor at The Federalist and joins us right now. John, you think this should happen? Get rid of Austin?
Oh, yeah, let's get rid of Austin, Houston, Washington, D.C. Let's get rid of them all. If we're going to go down this road, there's no stopping it.
Madison, Wisconsin, how about that?
Yeah, there you go. Jackson, Mississippi. You know, this is the problem. When this whole thing started where we had to remove Confederate statues and we had to rename schools that were named after Confederate generals and Jefferson Davis, it was really obvious from the beginning that there was no limiting principle to the renaming, that once we start renaming schools and streets and cities and tearing down statues, eventually we're going to have to go after the Founding Fathers. We're going to have to go after Abraham Lincoln. We're going to have to go after Woodrow Wilson. Everybody in the past who had opinions that today are unacceptable is going to have to go.
Right. By the way, you can go back even a short time ago. Remember, there was a lot of political figures against same-sex marriage. Now it's hard to find many that are. People evolve, people get better. No one defends slavery. But, man, there's a lot to be proud of in our history, and we should debate it, talk about it, and go over it. And I got to give credit to George P. Bush. He's the only political figure I can see right now who stood up, you know, the son of Jeb. He said the nephew of the former president. He says that absolutely not. This will not be taken down. There would be no Texas if it wasn't for Steve Austin, who took on the mantle of his father, Moses Austin, who died before Texas could become a state. But first, it was its own nation. You can't deny that history.
No, you can't. And, you know, we have to take our history, warts and all. One of the things that we have to accept about American history is that it's painful, it's complicated, but also the ways that we remember our history are complicated too. So the statues, the naming of things after Confederate generals and leaders, it's all now a part of our history. Rather than tearing it down and trying to eradicate it and erase it, why don't we try to educate ourselves and our children about it? Why don't we add more explanatory plaques next to the statues instead of tearing them down so that we understand better where we came from and where we're going, instead of trying to erase the past and blot out the unpleasant parts?
10-second answer. Is it a mission of people to make Americans embarrassed about their history, or is this just coincidence?
No, this is part of a ploy to use history and public memory as a political weapon. So that's exactly what it is.
John Daniel Davidson, thanks so much. And
Thanks for having me.
They do say it's unlikely that it will change its name, but they are focused on the Confederate statue. That is it for us for now. Join me again tomorrow morning on Fox and Friends. And then, of course, you can check out my radio show, The Brian Kilmeade Show, from 9 till noon. And I hope you do that every single day. Good night from New York. And also, Sean Hannity is next from wherever he chooses to be.
I got a question. So you host the 3 hours this morning, then the 3-hour radio show, then you host the 5. Now you're doing the 8 o'clock show, and you're supposed to be back in 6 hours. If you're late tomorrow, I am so busting you on the air tomorrow night.
Sean, I was going to say, could I sleep over your mansion? Because I don't want to drive all the way home because I got to get here in time.
I live an hour, and I live further out than you do.